Hello and welcome. If you enjoy calm stories like this, tap like and subscribe for a new one each week. Let's begin. I'm so glad you're here. Find a place where you can rest. A place where you feel safe and comfortable. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders soften. Take a slow, deep breath in. And now, a long, gentle breath out. Let the sounds of your day begin to fade. The conversations, the notifications, the lists of things to do. Let them all drift away, like little paper boats on a quiet stream. Picture a street in a small town, just as the sun begins to set. The sky is a soft blend of orange and purple. One by one, porch lights are turning on. They cast warm, golden pools on the pavement. You can hear the gentle hum of evening, the chirp of crickets starting their nightly song. A screen door creaks shut somewhere down the block. Down at the end of the main street, a green cross on a sign flickers to life. It's the town pharmacy. Its light is steady and reassuring, a beacon in the growing dusk. Tonight, we're going to tell a story. It's a quiet story, but a heavy one. It's a story about that pharmacy, and thousands like it. It's about a promise of relief, and the long, winding path that followed. You don't need to do anything but listen. Let the rhythm of the words be a soft blanket. If you drift off to sleep, that's perfectly all right. This story will be here, waiting for you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Promise of Relief. Our story starts in the late 1990s. A time that felt, for many, full of promise. The world was moving faster, and medicine was moving with it. There was a new idea taking hold in doctors' offices and hospitals across the country. It was a compassionate idea, born from a desire to help. The idea was that pain should be taken more seriously. For too long, people had been told to just live with their pain. A bad back from a life of hard work. The ache in the joints that never quite went away. The sharp, lingering pain after an injury or an operation. A movement began to call pain the fifth vital sign. Just as a doctor would check your temperature, your pulse, your breathing rate, and your blood pressure, they should also ask about your pain. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much did it hurt? It was a revolution in thinking. Suddenly, patients felt heard. Their suffering was being acknowledged, quantified, and written down in their charts. And doctors, armed with this new focus, felt a renewed duty to provide relief. Into this changing world, a new promise emerged. It arrived in the form of a small pill. This wasn't just another painkiller. It was different, the marketing said. It was an opioid, yes, but it was formulated with a special time-release coating. This meant it could provide 12 hours of steady, reliable relief from a single dose. The most powerful part of the promise was this: the risk of addiction was low. Extraordinarily low. Less than 1%, some materials suggested. The reasoning was that the slow, steady release of the medication would prevent the euphoric rush that led to addiction with other, older opioids. It was a scientific-sounding argument that made so much sense. Imagine sitting in a small examination room. The paper on the table crinkles beneath you. The doctor, a kind person you've known for years, swivels on a squeaking chair. They've seen the way you wince when you stand up. They've heard you talk about the things you can no longer do. Gardening, playing with your grandchildren, even just getting a good night's sleep. And now they hold a pen over a prescription pad. There's something new, they might say. It's helping a lot of people. For someone living in the gray, muted world of chronic pain, this was more than just a prescription. It was a key. A ticket back to a life they thought they had lost. The hope was immense. It was the hope of waking up without that familiar, dreaded ache. The hope of a clear head, free from the distraction of constant hurt. The first time picking up that bottle from the pharmacy, the plastic was smooth and cool in your hand. The pharmacist's instructions were clear and reassuring. At home, the crisp paper of the information leaflet, folded into a tiny square, seemed to confirm everything. A new chapter was beginning. This promise of relief spread quickly. It was a message of hope, amplified by a massive marketing campaign. It was a story everyone wanted to believe. Patients wanted to believe they could be free from pain. Doctors wanted to believe they could finally offer that freedom, safely. And so, across the country, in quiet towns and bustling cities, the promise was made, over and over again. A pen would scratch across a prescription pad. A bottle would be filled. A life was about to change. And the pain, for a time, began to recede. Chapter 2. Prescriptions rise, guardrails fail. The promise felt so real because it was everywhere. It wasn't just in the doctor's office. It was in the glossy pages of the most respected medical journals. Full-page advertisements showed images of healthy, active people, smiling and vibrant. The message was clear. Pain did not have to be a life sentence. A vast army of sales representatives was dispatched across the nation. They were friendly, well-dressed, and armed with compelling data. They arrived in small family practices and large urban hospitals, carrying binders filled with charts and studies. They brought lunch for the office staff. They left behind branded coffee mugs, pens, and fishing hats. Small, friendly tokens of a revolutionary new treatment. These representatives were trained to address the biggest fear doctors had: addiction. They would speak about pseudo-addiction, the idea that a patient who seemed desperate for more medication wasn't an addict, but was simply undertreated for their pain. The solution, they argued, was not to cut the patient off, but to increase the dose. It was a subtle but profound shift in thinking. Doctors, who are by nature compassionate and driven to alleviate suffering, were receptive. They were also busy. A primary care physician might only have 15 minutes with each patient. Chronic pain is a complex, time-consuming problem to manage. It can involve physical therapy, psychological support, and lifestyle changes. A prescription, on the other hand, was fast. It was a concrete, immediate solution to the number on the pain scale. And so, the prescriptions began to flow. And then they began to flood. At the same time, the guardrails that were supposed to protect the public began to show cracks. The regulatory agencies, which are meant to be watchdogs, were sometimes understaffed and overwhelmed. The claim that the risk of addiction was less than 1% was based on flimsy evidence, but it was repeated so often that it took on the weight of fact. It was a statistic that provided a powerful sense of security. In some places, a new kind of clinic began to appear. Later, they would be called pill mills. These weren't your typical doctor's offices. They often operated on a cash-only basis. Lines would form outside the door before the sun came up. The examinations were brief, the questions few. The primary outcome of a visit was a prescription for a high dose of opioid painkillers. These clinics became magnets, drawing people from hundreds of miles away, all seeking the relief they had been promised. Early warning signals began to flicker, like distant heat lightning. A pharmacist in a small Appalachian town might notice the same doctor was writing hundreds of prescriptions for the same drug. A rural coroner might see a small, troubling uptick in overdose deaths, but attribute it to isolated incidents. Researchers published papers in less-known journals, pointing to concerning trends in their local areas, but these signals were often lost in the noise. The system was built on trust. Patients trusted their doctors. Doctors trusted the pharmaceutical companies and the regulators. Everyone trusted the promise. The sheer volume of pills being produced and prescribed was staggering, enough for every adult in America to have their own bottle. The numbers were climbing year after year into the early 2000s. The hum of the machinery in the factories was constant. The delivery trucks leaving the distribution centers were always full. The promise of relief had become an industry. It was an industry built on a simple, powerful story. But the story was starting to unravel at the edges. The guardrails were not just failing. In some cases, they had been systematically dismantled. The quiet hum of commerce was beginning to drown out the quiet whispers of caution, and the pills kept flowing into medicine cabinets in every corner of the nation. Chapter 3. The First Wave. The first wave did not arrive with a crash. It was a slow, rising tide. It began in the medicine cabinets of ordinary homes. A prescription for 30 pills might be written for a wisdom tooth extraction, but only 3 were used. The rest sat on the shelf. A bottle with a few pills left over from a knee surgery was tucked away, forgotten. Medicine cabinets across the country became unintentional stockpiles of powerful narcotics. This is where the concept of diversion comes in. It's a simple word for a complicated process. It means a pill prescribed for one person ends up being used by another. It could be a teenager, curious, taking a pill from their parents' cabinet. It could be a friend sharing a few pills with someone who had thrown out their back. It seemed harmless enough. Sharing is a human instinct. Helping a friend in pain feels like the right thing to do. But as the number of prescriptions grew, so did the number of people developing a dependence. This wasn't a moral failing. It was a physiological response. The body adapts to the presence of the opioid, and when the pills run out, the withdrawal can be agonizing. A desperate search for more begins. Families started to notice things were wrong, but it was hard to understand what they were seeing. A loved one, who was once vibrant and engaged, became withdrawn and secretive. Money might go missing from a wallet. There were long, unexplained absences. The rattle of a pill bottle, once a sound of comfort, now sparked a flicker of anxiety. The shame and stigma were immense. Families often suffered in silence, unsure where to turn. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was a legitimate, doctor-prescribed medication. How could it lead to this? Primary care clinics, the very places where the promise began, were now on the front lines of a crisis they were not equipped to handle. Doctors who had prescribed the medications with the best of intentions were now faced with patients who were dependent, desperate, and sometimes angry. They had been told this was safe. They had been told to trust the science. Now, they were caught in the middle, trying to undo the damage. The overdose numbers, which had been a slow trickle, began to rise steadily through the mid-2000s. This was the first wave. It was a wave of deaths caused primarily by prescription opioids. The headlines started to appear, first in local papers, then in national news. They told stories of high school athletes, of stay-at-home mothers, of factory workers, people from all walks of life. The initial policy responses were slow to form. States began to create prescription drug monitoring programs, or PDMPs. These were electronic databases designed to track the prescribing of controlled substances. A doctor could, in theory, look up a patient to see if they were receiving opioid prescriptions from multiple providers. But the systems were clunky, and not all states had them. It was a small dam against a rising river. The tide was still coming in. The sheer number of pills in circulation meant that the problem would continue to grow for years, even if all new prescribing stopped overnight. The promise of relief had left a bitter legacy. It had sown the seeds of a crisis in the most trusted of places, the doctor's office and the family home. And the town exhaled, holding its loved ones a little closer. Chapter 4. From Cabinets to Street Supply. Let us step away from the headlines now and breathe with the hush of a sleeping street. The streetlights cast long shadows. A cat slips silently across a lawn. The world is quiet. By the year 2010, the tide of the first wave was beginning to be understood. The scale of the overprescribing was undeniable. The pressure on doctors, regulators, and pharmaceutical companies was immense. And so, the pendulum began to swing back. Prescribing guidelines became stricter. Doctors became far more cautious. The pill mills were raided and shut down. And in a landmark move, the most popular brand of oxycodone was reformulated. It was turned into a gummy, abuse-deterrent gel when crushed, making it much harder to misuse. These were necessary steps. They were designed to turn off the tap. But they had a devastating, unintended consequence. For the hundreds of thousands of people who now had a powerful opioid use disorder, the world changed overnight. Their prescription was cut off. Their source disappeared. But their physical dependence remained. The body still craved the substance it had been trained to expect. Imagine the desperation. The sickness of withdrawal is profound. It is a deep, cellular agony. And so, a great migration began. It was a quiet, desperate migration from the doctor's office to the illicit street market. People who had never imagined themselves breaking the law were now forced to seek out illegal sources to feel normal. To stop the sickness, the few prescription pills that were still diverted to the street became incredibly expensive. A single pill could cost $80 or more. And that's when heroin arrived to fill the void. Heroin, an older, feared opioid, was suddenly the most logical economic choice. It was cheap, powerful, and widely available. A dose that could stave off withdrawal might cost only $5 or $10. For someone who had lost their job, their savings, their stability to their dependents, the choice was brutal and clear. This transition from pills to heroin dramatically escalated the risk. A pharmaceutical pill is a known quantity. You know the dose down to the milligram. Heroin on the street is the opposite. It is a complete unknown. Its purity can vary wildly from one batch to the next. One bag might be 5% pure heroin, and the next might be 40%. There is no way for the user to know. This variability is what makes it so dangerous. Someone accustomed to using a weaker batch could easily overdose and die if they encountered a stronger one, even if they used the exact same amount. 0T. The method of use also often changed, from swallowing a pill to injecting the drug, which introduces a host of new health risks, from infections to collapsed veins. This was the beginning of the second wave. The faces of the crisis began to change. The problem was no longer hidden in medicine cabinets. It was now visible on the streets. The quiet desperation of the first wave gave way to a more open, more dangerous chapter. The people caught in this transition were not abstract statistics. They were our neighbors, our children, our friends. They were people who had been started on this path by a trusted medical system, who were now abandoned to a perilous, unregulated market. The path that began with a promise of relief now led to a place of immense danger and uncertainty. The sound of a car driving away too quickly down a dark street. The cold feel of a coin in a nervous hand. A new kind of fear had taken root. Chapter 5. Fentanyl arrives. In the world of medicine, fentanyl was not new. It was first synthesized in Belgium in 1959. For decades, it has been a crucial tool for doctors. It is a synthetic opioid, meaning it is created in a laboratory rather than derived from the poppy plant. Its primary characteristic is its incredible potency. It is estimated to be 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, and many times more potent than heroin. This potency makes it extremely effective. In a hospital setting, it is used to manage severe pain during and after surgery. It is administered in carefully controlled, microscopic doses by an anesthesiologist. It also comes in the form of a patch, which can provide slow, steady relief for patients with chronic, debilitating pain, often from cancer. In this controlled, medical context, fentanyl is a blessing. It is a powerful tool for compassion. But around the year 2013, something changed. A new kind of fentanyl began to appear. This was not pharmaceutical fentanyl, diverted from hospitals. This was illicitly manufactured fentanyl, cooked in clandestine labs far away. From the perspective of a drug trafficker, illicit fentanyl is a near-perfect product. Because it is so potent, a very small amount can be stretched to make a huge number of doses. A kilogram of fentanyl, a mass the size of a bag of sugar, can be powerful enough to produce hundreds of thousands, or even 1 million, fake pills. This makes it incredibly profitable. And because it is so compact, it is much easier to smuggle than bulky plant-based drugs like heroin or cocaine. This illicit fentanyl began to seep into the heroin supply. A dealer might mix a small amount of fentanyl powder into their heroin to make it stronger and more desirable. But the mixing process is crude. Imagine mixing powdered sugar and cocoa powder in a bowl. It's almost impossible to get a perfectly even blend. There will be clumps of pure cocoa. This is known as the chocolate chip cookie effect. One part of the batch might have very little fentanyl, while another part, a hot spot, might have a lethal dose. The user has no way of knowing what their dose contains. Every single use becomes a game of Russian roulette. Then, a new and even more insidious development began. The traffickers started using fentanyl to manufacture counterfeit pills. They bought pill presses, machines that can stamp powder into pills that look identical to real pharmaceuticals. They would press fentanyl powder, mixed with fillers and binders, into pills that looked exactly like a 30-milligram oxycodone pill, or a Xanax bar, or an Adderall tablet. The deception was nearly perfect. The color, the shape, the stamped markings, all of it could be mimicked. This changed the risk landscape completely. A person might think they are buying a familiar prescription pill on the illicit market. They might be a teenager experimenting, or someone trying to manage their anxiety. They believe they are taking a known dose of a known substance. but they are not. They are taking fentanyl. And because they have no tolerance for opioids, a single pill can be enough to shut down their respiratory system. Imagine a laboratory technician, late at night. The lab is quiet, filled with the low hum of ventilation and the gentle whir of machines. They are running toxicology reports from recent overdose cases. On the screen, a chemical signature appears that they have rarely seen before outside of a hospital context. Fentanyl. Then it appears in another case. And another. A new, terrifying pattern is emerging from the data. A ghost has entered the machine. The arrival of illicit fentanyl was a paradigm shift. It was a chemical accelerant poured onto the fire of the existing opioid crisis. The rules had changed. The very nature of the drug supply was now fundamentally unstable and unpredictable. The quiet promise of relief from a pill had mutated into a silent, deadly gamble. Chapter 6. The Second and Third Waves. The story of this epidemic is often told in 3 waves. It's a useful way to understand how the crisis has evolved. The first wave, as we've heard, began around 1999. It was defined by the overprescribing of opioid painkillers. The overdose deaths in this era were primarily caused by drugs like oxycodone and hydrocodone. The second wave began around 2010. This was the heroin wave. As prescription pills became harder to get, many people transitioned to heroin. The death rate began to climb more steeply. The third wave began around 2013. This is the synthetic opioid wave, dominated by illicitly manufactured fentanyl. This wave is different. It is not a gentle tide. It is a tsunami. The line on the graph showing overdose deaths doesn't just climb, it goes nearly vertical. Imagine a map of the United States in 2013. You might see hotspots of fentanyl-related deaths in the Northeast, in states like New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and in the industrial Midwest, in Ohio and Pennsylvania. It looks like a series of isolated outbreaks. Now, picture that map changing year by year. The red of the hot spots begins to spread, like ink bleeding across paper. By 2015, it has saturated the East Coast. By 2017, it has crossed the Mississippi River and is moving west. By 2019, nearly the entire country is covered. Fentanyl is no longer a regional problem. It is a national catastrophe. Another defining feature of this third wave is polysubstance use. It became increasingly rare for fentanyl to be the only drug involved in an overdose. The illicit drug supply became a chaotic mixture. Fentanyl was often mixed with stimulants like cocaine or methamphetamine. This creates an incredibly dangerous combination. A person might use a stimulant to feel alert and euphoric, not knowing it is contaminated with fentanyl. The stimulant can mask the initial sedative effects of the opioid, leading the person to believe they are fine. But the fentanyl is still at work, slowing their breathing. When the stimulant wears off, the full force of the opioid takes over, and their breathing can stop completely. It's like hitting the gas and the brakes at the same time. The body's systems are pulled in opposite directions, and they can fail. This new reality placed an unbearable strain on the people on the front lines. Think of an EMS dispatcher in a small city. The radio in the dispatch center is a constant crackle of addresses and codes. The call for a suspected overdose used to be an occasional event. Now, it comes in multiple times a shift. The blinking lights on the digital map seem to cluster in the same neighborhoods, the same apartment buildings. There is a weary rhythm to the calls, a sense of fighting a battle that is only getting worse. Think of a coroner in a rural county. Their office is small, their budget tight. They used to know the families of the people who ended up on their table. Now, the numbers are overwhelming. The toxicology reports come back with a word they had barely heard of a few years ago: fentanyl. 0T. And then, fentanyl analogs, carfentanil, furanylfentanyl substances, even more potent and obscure. They are documenting, in quiet, meticulous detail, the relentless advance of a chemical wave. The third wave washed away all the old assumptions. It was no longer just about a specific type of drug user. Anyone who used any illicit substance was now at risk, whether they knew it or not. The counterfeit pills meant that even a one-time experiment by a teenager could be fatal. The landscape of risk had been redrawn, and it was treacherous for everyone. The tsunami had arrived, and it was touching every community. Chapter 7 lives in the balance. Let's pull away from the maps and the numbers. They tell us the scale of the tragedy, but they cannot tell us about its heart. The heart of this story is about people. It is about the lives caught in the balance, and the hands that reached out to help. Picture a first responder, a paramedic, kneeling on the pavement of a gas station parking lot. The sirens have faded, leaving a pulsing red light that illuminates the scene. Their movements are practiced and calm. Their voice is steady as they talk to the person on the ground, even if that person is unconscious. They work with a quiet focus, a bubble of professionalism in the midst of chaos. They have done this more times than they can count. Each time, they bring the same dedication. They are a stranger's best hope in their worst moment. Picture a nurse in a hospital emergency department. The lights are bright. The sounds are a constant mix of beeps, voices, and rolling carts. A family has just been brought into a small, curtained-off room. They are terrified and confused. The nurse brings them a cup of water. They explain what is happening in simple, gentle terms. They answer the same questions over and over with infinite patience. Their touch on a shoulder is firm and reassuring. In a place of fear, they are a steady anchor of compassion. Picture an outreach worker walking down a city street. They carry a backpack filled not with judgment, but with supplies, bottles of water, clean socks, snacks, and kits containing Naloxone. They know people by name. They don't preach or demand. They listen. They ask how someone is doing, and they wait for the real answer. They offer a connection, a moment of dignity, a reminder that someone cares. Their work is slow, patient, and built on trust. It is the quiet, essential work of planting seeds of hope in hard ground. And then there are the families. Picture a mother sitting at her kitchen table late at night, long after the rest of the house is asleep. She is sewing a square of fabric for a memorial quilt. On the fabric is a photo of her son, smiling on a sunny day. Each stitch is a memory. Each stitch is an act of love. She is joining her private grief to a community of others, creating something beautiful and heartbreaking from their shared loss. Picture a father tending a small garden he planted in his backyard. He is not a natural gardener, but he is learning. Each plant is in memory of his daughter. The weeds he pulls are like the anger and the helplessness he feels. The water he gives the plants is like the tears he has shed. The small, bright flowers that bloom are a testament to a love that endures. These are the stories that don't make the headlines. They are stories of quiet dignity, the profound, aching grief of a parent. the unwavering dedication of a helper. The simple, powerful act of bearing witness to another person's humanity. At vigils, you can see the soft glow of hundreds of candles held in trembling hands. You can hear the rustle of a memorial ribbon tied to a tree branch, its color faded by the sun and rain. You can feel the immense weight of the framed photographs people hold, pictures of faces full of life and promise. This is the true measure of the epidemic. It is not in the numbers. It is in the empty chair at the dinner table. It is in the love that remains, fierce and unending, after a life has been cut short. It is in the quiet, daily acts of courage and care that shine a light into the deepest darkness. Chapter 8. Naloxone, Test Strips, and Harm Reduction. In the face of such a devastating crisis, a new approach began to gain ground. It is called harm reduction. It is a simple, pragmatic, and compassionate idea. It accepts the reality that people use drugs, and it focuses on keeping them alive and as safe as possible. It does not demand abstinence as a precondition for help. It seeks to meet people where they are. One of the most important tools of harm reduction is a medication called Naloxone. You may know it by its brand name, Narcan. Naloxone is an opioid antagonist. Think of it like this. In the brain, there are special landing spots for opioids, called receptors. When opioids like fentanyl land on these receptors, they slow down and can eventually stop a person's breathing. Naloxone has a stronger attraction to these receptors than opioids do. When it is administered, it rushes to the brain and essentially knocks the opioids off the receptors, taking their place. This blocks the effect of the opioids and allows the person to start breathing again. It is like a rescue mission at the cellular level. It is not a cure for addiction, but it is a cure for an overdose. It pulls someone back from the brink of death, giving them a chance for another day. For years, Naloxone was only available to paramedics and doctors. But harm reduction advocates fought to get it into the hands of the people most likely to witness an overdose, people who use drugs and their families and friends. Now, in many places, it is available over the counter, often as a simple nasal spray. Imagine a community training session in a library basement. A health worker is demonstrating how to use the nasal spray device. You can hear the gentle click as they show how it works on a dummy. The people in the room are from all walks of life. A worried mother, a restaurant owner who wants to have a kid on hand for his staff, a college student. They leave with a small box containing 2 doses of the medication. It is a box that holds the power to reverse an overdose and save a life. Alongside Naloxone came Good Samaritan laws. These laws provide legal protection for people who call 911 to report an overdose. In the past, the fear of being arrested for drug possession might have prevented someone from making that life-saving call. These laws removed that fear, encouraging people to do the right thing. Another vital tool is the fentanyl test strip. These are small, simple strips of paper, similar to a pregnancy test. They were originally designed for urine testing, but they can be used to check drugs for the presence of fentanyl before they are consumed. A person can dissolve a tiny amount of their substance in water, dip the strip in, and see in minutes if it contains fentanyl. This knowledge is power. It allows someone to make a more informed choice. They might choose not to use the drug, or to use a smaller amount, or to make sure a friend is with them with Naloxone ready. The crinkle of the foil packet containing these strips is the sound of a small but powerful act of self-preservation. The most debated aspect of harm reduction is the idea of supervised consumption sites. These are clean, safe, medically supervised spaces where people can use pre-obtained drugs. Medical staff are present to respond immediately to any overdose. They do not provide drugs, but they provide sterile supplies, oxygen, and naloxone. Crucially, they also provide a connection to healthcare, counseling, and treatment services. The goal is simple: to prevent fatal overdoses and connect people to care. While they are controversial, the evidence from countries where they operate shows that they save lives. Harm reduction is a philosophy of radical empathy. It says that every life is valuable and worth saving, right here, right now. It is a quiet, determined effort to build a net of safety and support beneath people who are walking a tightrope. Chapter 9. Pandemic years. And then, in 2020, the world shut down. The COVID-19 pandemic brought a new kind of silence to our streets. But for those struggling with substance use, this silence was not peaceful. It was a silence of isolation, and it was deadly. The pandemic was like a perfect storm that supercharged the overdose crisis. The very things that keep people in recovery and keep people who use drugs safer were suddenly taken away. Support group meetings, like Narcotics Anonymous or Smart Recovery, could no longer happen in person. The church basements and community centers were locked. These meetings are a lifeline, a source of connection and shared strength. They moved to Zoom, of course. But for many, the blue light of a screen in a dark room was a poor substitute for the warmth of a shared physical space. The quiet echo of a voice on a video call could not replace a reassuring hand on the shoulder. Treatment centers had to reduce their capacity or shut down temporarily. Outreach services were curtailed. The simple, human connections that are the bedrock of recovery became frayed and distant. At the same time, the stress, fear, and grief of the pandemic were immense. People lost their jobs. They were cut off from their families. They were trapped at home with their anxieties. For someone in recovery, or for someone whose drug use was a way of coping with trauma, this was an incredibly dangerous environment. The illicit drug supply also became even more unpredictable. Global supply chains were disrupted, leading traffickers to use whatever chemicals they could get their hands on. The chaotic mix of substances became even more chaotic. Fentanyl became even more ubiquitous. And a frightening new trend accelerated: the sale of counterfeit pills through social media. Dealers used popular apps to connect with buyers, often targeting young people who were stuck at home, bored, and online. They used emoji codes and slick, professional-looking menus. A teenager might order what they think is a Percocet or a Xanax and have it delivered to their door like a pizza. But the pill that arrived was a fake, pressed with fentanyl. The transaction felt modern and safe, but it was incredibly perilous. The overdose numbers, which were already at historic highs, soared. In the 12-month period ending in April 2021, the United States recorded over 100,000 overdose deaths for the first time ever. It was a staggering, heartbreaking milestone. It was as if a crisis that was already a 5-alarm fire had been doused with gasoline. The pandemic created a profound isolation, and in that isolation, the overdose crisis festered and grew. People were dying alone in their apartments, in motel rooms, in quiet suburban houses. The sirens were still there, but they felt more distant, part of a world that was holding its breath. The quiet tragedy of the epidemic was now unfolding behind closed doors, amplified by the silence of a world in lockdown. Chapter 10. New threats in the mix. Just when it seemed the crisis could not possibly get any worse, a new shadow fell across the landscape. It was a substance called Illicit. On the street, it earned a grim nickname, Trank. Xylazine is not an opioid. It is a powerful sedative and muscle relaxant, approved for use in veterinary medicine. It is used by veterinarians to tranquilize large animals, like horses and cattle. It is not meant for human consumption. Sometime around 2019, and accelerating through the pandemic years, xylazine began to be mixed into the illicit fentanyl supply, particularly on the East Coast. It was added to prolong the effect of fentanyl, which can be short-lived. But it brought with it a host of new and terrible dangers. First, because it is a powerful sedative, it dramatically increases the risk of a fatal overdose. It compounds the respiratory depression caused by fentanyl. It is like pouring water on a drowning person. Second, and crucially, Naloxone does not work on xylazine. Naloxone is an opioid antagonist. It has no effect on a non-opioid sedative. This does not mean naloxone shouldn't be used. Fentanyl is almost always present in these cases, so naloxone is still essential to reverse the opioid's effects. But even after naloxone is given, the person may not wake up completely. They may remain unconscious, their breathing dangerously slow, because of the effects of the xylazine. This complicates the job of first responders, who now have to provide rescue breathing for longer periods while they wait for the sedative to wear off. Third, xylazine is associated with severe, necrotic skin wounds. These are not just at the injection site. They can appear anywhere on the body. They are painful, difficult to treat, and can lead to serious infections and amputations. Imagine a wound care nurse in a small clinic, working with quiet dedication. They gently clean and dress these wounds, which are unlike anything they have seen before. Their work is a testament to the principle of caring for the whole person, treating every injury with dignity and skill, no matter the cause. The rustle of sterile gauze is the sound of their unwavering commitment. The arrival of xylazine was another sign of the increasingly toxic and unpredictable nature of the illicit drug supply. It was no longer just about fentanyl. The supply was a chemical soup, a grab bag of synthetic substances where the user never knew what they were consuming. 0T. In the quiet of a toxicology lab, a new note began to appear on the reports. Beside the familiar finding of fentanyl, the word xylazine was now being typed over and over. It was the signature of a new phase of the crisis, one that was even more complex and more dangerous than what had come before. Each new substance added to the mix was another variable in a deadly equation, another challenge for the helpers, and another threat to the lives hanging in the balance. Chapter 11. Courts, Companies, and Policy Shifts. While the crisis was raging on the streets and in homes, another battle was being fought in a different arena, the nation's courtrooms. For years, state attorneys general, counties, cities, and tribes had been filing lawsuits. Thousands of them. They were aimed at the companies that had played a role in creating and fueling the first wave of the opioid crisis. The targets were the pharmaceutical manufacturers who made the pills and deceptively marketed them. They were the distributors, the massive, quiet middlemen who shipped billions of pills to pharmacies, allegedly ignoring red flags about suspicious orders. And they were the pharmacy chains that dispensed the pills in huge quantities. The courtrooms were quiet, cavernous spaces. The scent of old paper and polished wood hung in the air. Lawyers argued over mountains of documents, internal emails, marketing plans, and sales data. The goal was accountability. The goal was to secure resources to help clean up the damage. Slowly, and then, all at once, the settlements began to come. They were historic in their scale. Tens of billions of dollars. The companies, while often not admitting wrongdoing, agreed to pay these vast sums over a period of many years. The money was designated for abatement. That means it is supposed to be used to fund the fight against the opioid crisis. 0. T. Money for treatment centers. Money for naloxone distribution. Money for prevention programs in schools. Money for housing and recovery support. At the same time, policy was shifting. Prescription drug monitoring programs, the databases that track prescriptions, were now in use in nearly every state, and they were becoming more sophisticated and easier for doctors to use. There was a major push to expand access to the gold standard of treatment for opioid use disorder, medications like methadone and buprenorphine. These are also opioids, but they work to stabilize the brain, eliminate withdrawal, and reduce cravings, allowing a person to rebuild their life. For too long, they had been difficult to access due to heavy regulation. New laws made it easier for doctors to prescribe buprenorphine, a crucial step in making treatment available on demand. And in the world of public health, data became a key weapon. Health departments created sophisticated data dashboards, viewable online by the public. With bright colors and interactive maps, these dashboards track overdose trends in near real time. They can spot a sudden spike in overdoses in a particular county, signaling a potentially deadly new batch of drugs in the area. This allows for rapid alerts to be sent out to first responders, hospitals, and community groups, who can then flood the area with naloxone and warnings. The quiet clicking of keyboards as data analysts update these maps is the sound of a modern, agile response to a fast-moving crisis. In the halls of government, debates continued about how to classify fentanyl and its analogs, trying to balance the need for law enforcement tools with the need to avoid the mistakes of past drug wars. None of these things is a magic bullet. The settlement money is complex to distribute. Policy changes are slow to take effect, but together, they represent a systemic shift. They are the slow, grinding work of turning a massive ship. They are an acknowledgement that this crisis was not an accident, but the result of specific choices and system failures. And they are the foundation for building a future where such a catastrophe can never happen again. Good night outro. And so, our story comes to a close for tonight. Let's return to that quiet street where we began. The dusk has deepened into night. The moon is high in the sky. The porch lights are still glowing. Perhaps now, we see them a little differently. Some of those lights are on in remembrance. They are a quiet vigil for a life that ended too soon. A silent promise to never forget. Some of those lights are on in hope. They are for a loved one who is in recovery, a beacon to welcome them home. They are for a community that is healing, stitch by stitch. This story is one of immense sorrow. The numbers are so large, they are difficult to comprehend. But it is vital to remember that behind every number is a human being. A person who loved and was loved. A person with a story, with dreams, with a life that was precious. The story is also one of quiet, persistent care. The paramedic, the nurse, the outreach worker, the researcher, the parent. Their work does not always make the news, but it is the most powerful force for change. It is the steady, daily act of choosing compassion over judgment and hope over despair. If you or someone you love is struggling, please know that you are not alone, and help is available. Reach out to local health services or support networks in your community. There is hope, and there is care. Now, let your mind be still. Let the weight of this story settle, and then let it go. You have listened with an open heart, and that is enough. Take one last, slow breath in, and a long, soft breath out. May your sleep be peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. And may you wake to the light of a new day, feeling rested and at ease. Good night.